I'm going to tell you about possibly the least talented person to ever play for the All Blacks. This is All Black number 173, Harry Atkinson. It's very possible that he made the side without a single All Black selector or coach ever seeing him play, because, well, like I said, he wasn't good. But he had one thing going for him. He was massive. Legends of his size spread from his home on the West Coast all across the country, and when the All Black team was selected, there was no way they were passing up the opportunity to have Goliath on their team. So just how big was this guy? How big do you have to be in order to make the All Blacks purely on size alone? The answer is 188 centimetres, 95 kilograms. That's fine. It's okay, for context it's about the same height and weight as Beauden Barrett. But this was 1913, and everyone was scrawny and weak. Atkinson towered above his competition, and coasted into the team like a fat kid who hit puberty early. He played one test for the All Blacks, a 30-5 win over Australia in 1913, in which he did absolutely nothing. Then somehow, he managed to get selected for the All Blacks tour of North America, where despite absolutely drubbing every opponent, he sat on the bench almost the entire time. His problem was, for all his mass to throw around, he was just too damn nice. The definition of a gentle giant, really. He didn't want to use his size, but that was the only thing going for him. Once the tour was over, he was sent back to the West Coast, where he was never heard from again. His test career will forever read, 1 test played, 0 points. It may sound small, but he helped carve out a small piece of history in the great mountain that is All Black rugby. It's the pinnacle of all young New Zealanders' aspirations, the chance to don the black jersey. It's a symbol for excellence in the world of sport, let alone rugby. Many have dreamed of pulling on that jersey, few have ever done it. Look at the list of men who have taken the field for the All Blacks, and you'll see icons, heroes of the game who towered above the rest. They transcended rugby and became superstars. But they couldn't take the field unless they have 14 other blokes by their side. This is the story of those guys. The ones at the edge of the frame, lost to history, a forgotten side story. This is the story of the One Test All Blacks. Let's go all the way back to the 15th of August 1903. At the Sydney Cricket Ground, the All Blacks played their first test ever, against Australia, and their captain, All Black number 69, Jimmy Duncan. For an idea of how important his legacy is, he played first 5/8 in that game, a position name he came up with. There were 30,000 in attendance, the weather was nice, firm underfoot. This was the test that started more than a century of sporting dominance. The small pebbles that started an avalanche, and Jimmy Duncan was the smallest pebble of the lot. The All Blacks won, 22 points to 3. The first of well over 400 test wins the All Blacks would achieve, in their still growing history. Duncan retired at the end of the tour, but that would not be the end of his All Blacks career. In 1904 he coached the All Blacks in their first ever home test, a 9-3 win over Great Britain in Wellington. He was also chosen to coach the All Blacks on their tour to Great Britain in 1905 and 6, which was controversial, not because they wanted someone else, but because the team didn't want to coach at all. Most of the team wanted to take another player instead of a coach, and there was so much bad blood that they ended up running a mutiny on him, and 2 senior players just appointed themselves coach. For the rest of the tour, everyone ignored everything Jimmy said, and he kinda just became a PR guy. He was also a ref, officiating a test between the All Blacks and the Anglo-Welsh in 1908. But the man was so clever, he used to wear a cap to games not only to hide his premature baldness, but also to pass that to his teammates in the hope the opposition would confuse that for the ball. He was one of the first true geniuses and masters of the game. He was the first ever All Blacks test captain, and the first ever All Blacks one-tester. Now while we're at this first test, we may as well look at another All Black one-tester, possibly the most obscure All Black I could find, kind of. The only thing we know about Paddy Long is that no one knows anything about him. At one point New Zealand Rugby hired historians to try track down every All Black ever. For decades, Paddy Long was a mystery that just couldn't be solved. Who was he? Well, no one knows. He played lock in the All Blacks 1903 tour to Australia and was the leading try scorer for the Fords. His sole test match was the test match on that tour. Like Jimmy Duncan, test match number 1. He returned from that tour, played a couple of games for Auckland, and disappeared from history. He never played rugby again, and no one could work out why. His name never registered to vote, his death notice never appeared in a paper, and he doesn't even have a birth certificate in this country, never married or had kids, and we don't know what he did for work. The only fact about him that anyone has been able to scrounge up is that in 1904 Paddy was suspended for 10 years from all rugby by the Auckland Rugby Union. From what I can gather, it was because an Auckland player was caught up in a scandal with a bookmaker, who paid that player to not play their best game, basically match fixing. Paddy took the fall for it. Whether or not it was him, no one's sure, but he did appeal the decision. In 1911 his suspension was finally lifted. He never played rugby again. As far as we know, he disappeared from the planet. No one knows what happened to him, but he played one test for the All Blacks. And that we will remember forever. Those wearing black jerseys are often viewed as heroes for many New Zealanders. But some of those wearing the black jersey were actual heroes. Jim Beard played 3 first-class rugby matches. Yep, just 3. And one of them was a test match. He was 19 years old in 1913 and had just been called up to the Otago side. Then the All Blacks came to Carisbrook to play Australia. The starting centre Eric Cockcroft came down with an injury. Jim Beard was called in as a replacement for no other reason than he was simply the closest rugby player on hand. What makes this more incredible is that Jim, whose first-class rugby experience consisted of 2 games of provincial rugby, played well enough to not only help the All Blacks secure a 25-13 win over Australia, but also earned him a spot on the team for the next week's test in Christchurch. Unfortunately for him, he missed that game with an injury. He would never play another game of rugby. First 5 Bobby Black could best be compared to Beauden Barrett when it comes to play style. Absurd speed and acceleration for the position. He had a first-class career spanning 20 games, 6 for the All Blacks, 12 for Otago, and 2 for Buller. His only test came after 2 impressive seasons for Otago, in the 1914 tour to Australia, playing in a hard-fought 5-0 win over the Wallabies. He returned from that series and played one more season in 1915, appearing for Buller and Otago. Like Beard, he would never play another game. They will both leave New Zealand and fight in World War I. Black died in the Battle of the Somme in 1916, aged 23. Jim Beard also died in France in 1917, also 23. The beauty of New Zealand, and by extension the All Blacks, is no matter where you go, you'll bump into someone you know. 2 degrees of separation. Even better still, there's a 50% chance you're related to them in some way. The All Blacks have had their fair share of families come through the system, but one of the most unique ones starts here. Police officer Ned Barry had an entirely uninteresting rugby career. He toured with the All Blacks twice, in 1932 and in 1934, where he would make his Test debut against Australia. A 3-3 draw, the All Blacks' second ever draw against Australia. Outside of this achievement, they would have not much more to do with New Zealand rugby for several decades. There's something about the one Test All Black that's kind of hard to capture. They're simultaneously both the picture of excellence and mediocrity. Someone who achieved everything, but also flunked out miserably. No one symbolises this confused legacy more than Eric Tindall. On one hand, you can make a legitimate argument that he's one of New Zealand's greatest ever athletes, but at the same time, he's also definitely not. Eric Tindall is a member of the elite group of double internationals who have played both rugby and cricket for New Zealand. To this day, he remains the only person in this country to play a test match in both sports. That's a record which will probably never be broken. And just to one-up that even more, Tindall then pulled off another double international later in life, being just the only person to ever both play and umpire tests in both sports. He was not only a physical specimen, but remarkably skilled at everything he tried. Walter Hadley once called him New Zealand's greatest sporting all-rounder. At age 22, he made his first-class debut for Wellington in a game against a little side called, the All Blacks, in a warm-up for their Northern Tour. These matchups happened all the time, and they were never fair. Provincial sides were hugely outmatched, and they had to dig deep into their reserves to fill the team because all their best players got stolen. This young, inexperienced Wellington side took on the best team in the world and smoked them. Tindall scored a try on debut, and Wellington went on to win, 36-23. It was never in doubt. After thoroughly embarrassing the All Blacks once, he was selected in the side 3 years later and proceeded to make everything worse. His one test for the All Blacks was against England in Twickenham in 1936. New Zealand lost 13-0, the first time they had ever lost to England. He played another game for the All Blacks, an 11-3 drubbing at the hands of Swansea, the first time the All Blacks ever lost to an international club side. He never played another rugby test. He was a genuine talent, but the games he appeared in will always have a black mark above them. His cricket was no better. He was easily the best wicketkeeper batsman in the country, and scored 6 first-class centuries, but when it came to the big stage, nothing went right. Across 5 matches and 9 innings, he had a test batting average of 9.12. To compare this to another great Black Caps all-rounder, if we take Chris Martin's best 9-inning stretch, his average in that is 8.5. For Tindall, if it weren't for a valiant 37 not out in a rained-out draw against England at the Oval, his career average would be 4. The only real notable highlight of Tindall's entire cricketing career came in 1937, a match between South Australia and New Zealand, which was meant to help the Kiwis make up money they lost on their tour of England. It was the only time a New Zealand side ever faced the great Sir Donald Bradman. The day's play had barely begun when Kiwi quick Jack Cowie belts one down to Bradman, who recklessly plays outside the line. Tindall makes a huge leap and with one outstretched hand plucks the ball from the air, landing in a heap. He's just called out Donald Bradman for 11 runs. Unfortunately, this was so early in the day that most of the audience was still in line, waiting to buy tickets. When they heard Bradman had been dismissed, they all left. There's even a book written about it. We didn't read it because we aren't nerds. But the only highlight of Eric Tindall's playing career cost his team money and defeated the entire point of the game. That's just the kind of player he was. That's the undying spirit of the One Test All Black. For someone to become an All Black, it usually takes no shortage of talent and in some cases luck. It also comes with a chip on your shoulder to prove doubters wrong. Some have bigger points to prove than others, and this player proved possibly the biggest point to one of his major detractors, the 1937 All Black selectors. Like others before him, Cobden had a very brief rugby career. 2 games for Canterbury B and 3 for Canterbury. He was described as a pacey wing, but also sizeable for his position, something the All Blacks have famously come to value from that position. He won selection for the All Blacks in 1937, where they were played the touring Springboks. His All Black career lasted a total of 25 minutes. Suffering a leg injury early in the game, he had to leave the game and the All Blacks would have to grind out a 13-7 win with only 14 men. At the conclusion of this game, he was seen celebrating with his teammates, seemingly healed from his injury. This outraged one of the All Blacks selectors who was of the opinion he should have played through the injury. The selector proposed to veto his future selection, suggesting that Cobden lacked the courage to play for the All Blacks. Cobden never played rugby in New Zealand again. In 1938 he signed up for the Royal Air Force, and as if to answer any questions about his courage, paid the ultimate sacrifice. Cobden was killed in action during the Battle of Britain, 11th of August 1940, his 26th birthday. Perhaps my favourite story of a One Test All Black comes in the form of a weird racial loophole, which really wasn't a loophole at all. Alan Blake was rumoured to have forgotten his Christian name from time to time, as he was far more commonly called by his nickname, Kiwi. An outstanding open-side flanker whose 20-year rugby career was broken up by the Second World War. He would provide the footprint for future great number 7s. This humble farmer played 178 first-class matches, 108 of those for Wairarapa Bush. In 1945 and 46, Kiwi played 24 games for the New Zealand Army squad, the Kiwis, including the 5 unofficial internationals against the Europe 5 nations. In 1950, Blake captained Wairarapa Bush in their famous 3-0 Ranfurly Shield win over Canterbury. He would also captain Wairarapa against the touring British and Irish Lions, to a respectable 13-27 loss. In 1959 he would get a chance at redemption, where he would once again lead Wairarapa. However, interestingly, Blake had to line up at lock to allow for a teenager with supposed great potential to play at open side. His name was Brian Lahore. The Lions won 37-11. Kiwi earned his shot for the All Blacks in 1949, in a loss to the touring Australian side. He would have had more tests, but was ineligible for that year's South Africa tour, due to not being white. Blake's greatest achievement in New Zealand rugby, however, was his exploits for the New Zealand Māori, where he played 26 matches and captained the side in several of those, including a narrow loss to the British and Irish Lions in 1950. The amazing thing about Kiwi Blake's New Zealand Māori career is that it should never have happened. Kiwi Blake was not Māori. Not 1/16th, not 1/64th, not even 1/256th. He was about as Māori as the then President of the United States, Harry S. Truman. The only reason Kiwi made it onto the Māori team was because he looked Māori. Hell, his Māori teammates knew he wasn't even Māori, but they didn't seem to mind. What made this situation even more fortuitous for Blake was that in the 1950s no one spoke te reo, so as captain he didn't even have to pretend to be Māori. It was just presumed by the public that dark skin equaled Māori. As it turns out, Blake got his darker skin tone from his Canadian grandfather, who Blake described as being a quarter Negro, so he was actually closer to being African American than Māori. And that's how a non-Māori managed to become captain of the New Zealand Māori team. An outstanding rugby player, and even better con man. For many players, rugby is a hobby, your Saturday runaround. If you're good enough, you might represent your club in the local Premier Division. However, once you step up that next level, it becomes more than a hobby. It becomes part of your livelihood. This wasn't always the case. George Napier, Christian Cullen, Don Clark, Ben Smith. Had Kemba wanted, he would have had easily found his way onto this list of great All Black fullbacks. Kemba was a star for the Nelson College First 15 and was quickly picked up by Wellington in 1966. He would go on to run on for the Wellington side at just 19 years old. The same year, he would also represent the New Zealand universities. It was his dedication to university that ultimately cut his All Black career short. The following year he was called into the North Island side, and was called up as a reserve for the All Blacks for the Lions tour. Kemba didn't take the field for that series, but he had 3 games against the Lions on that tour, for the New Zealand under-23s, New Zealand universities, and for Wellington in a famous victory. His rapid rise carried on in 1967, where he was awarded a spot on the All Blacks Tour de France in Britain. This selection raised some eyebrows, as it had come at the expense of star fullback Mick Willemint, who in his 9 tests had put up an impressive 70 points. Willemint never played another game in black. This, however, was looking like it was the start of something big for Kemba. Even though he didn't appear in any tests on the tour, it was apparent he was the fullback of the future. But in 1968, Kemba decided to focus on his studies. He only appeared in 1 fixture above club level, captaining the New Zealand University team against All Japan. He returned to the Wellington side the following year and once again captained the university side, this time on a tour to Hong Kong, Japan and Hawaii. He was selected again for the All Blacks on their tour to South Africa. In the 4th test, Kemba was given his chance and by all accounts he took it, scoring 14 of the All Blacks' 17 points in a narrow loss. That was his last game for the All Blacks. He would carry on playing for the New Zealand universities, eventually notching up 30 appearances for them. But let's look back at his 1 test, and for someone who's played only 1 test, it usually would be considered inappropriate to use his stats to compare him to other greats. But let's not get bogged down by that. Gerald Kemba scored 14 points in 1 test, giving him a very healthy 14 points per game. Out of all the top 50 test match point scorers in All Black history, only 3 averaged more points per game than this. Top of the chart with a whopping 19 points per game is Simon Culhane, yes, the man who scored 45 points on debut against Japan. Those 45 proved to be hugely invaluable, as if you take those other points away, the final score from that game would have been 100-17 to the All Blacks. The other 2 are Daniel Carter and Grant Fox. This alone tells us Kemba belonged in elite company, but with such a small sample size it's hard to properly gauge. If we take into account every game, not just tests he played for the All Blacks, 158 points in 19 games, putting him at 8.15 points per game, just a slither ahead of Carlos Spencer and well ahead of other greats such as Beauden Barrett and Fergie McCormick. This definitely proves his 14 points in tests is no fluke, and we can go forward using this number. Let's go further in depth with those 14 test points. The unique thing about these points is they came in a loss. Imagine if they came in a win. How many points would he have gotten? We may never know, but we can get an estimate. This is the average points per game of the top 10 points per game scorers in losses. As we see, everyone drops significantly. The only man on top of Kemba is yet again Culhane, who scored 15 in his only loss. No one else is close to Kemba on this, but I want to go further. Let's take those same 10 players and work out the average difference in points per game in wins and losses. This works out to almost exactly a difference of 5 points per game. It seems reasonable to expect Kemba to have been able to replicate that, and if we add those 5 points to his one test played, do they win? Yes, they do. Kemba had outstanding potential, but for him, his studies were too important, and in the end, it worked for him, having a very successful career as a lawyer. But what could have been? Using these numbers and the All Blacks' professional test winning percent of 77, we could run through a hypothetical 50 test career for Kemba. This would lead to 38 wins and 12 losses. Those averages work out to be 722 points in wins and 168 in losses, working out to be a test career of 50 tests and 890 points. At this rate, Gerald would have undoubtedly gone down as one of the greatest players of all time. But he didn't play 50 tests, he played one, and lost. Gerald Kemba. What a nerd. Kanye West once said, "This is family business." When George Scudder and Buff Milner made their debuts in 1969 and 70 respectively, they were not family, just two blokes trying to represent their nation as best as they could, and bring pride to their families. And while I don't doubt they did exactly that, they both also hit the height of mediocrity. They were both one-testers. As it turns out, it didn't require two journeymen to make the names Milner and Scudder notable, but one brief superstar, George's nephew and Buff's cousin, Nehe. Nehe Milner-Skudder had a short but electric All Blacks career, most notably starring in the All Blacks 2015 World Cup campaign. There's not much more to learn from Buff and George, but when two All Black families combine, the results can be spectacular. As we move into the 90s, the All Blacks would start to play a lot less touring games, meaning that there would be fewer All Blacks in general, and as such, less one-testers. But there are still stories to tell in this era, not least of all three players, whose one test all came on the biggest stage. Jason Hewitt was the third choice halfback in the 1991 World Cup, despite the fact John Preston was taken primarily as a first five. As such, Hewitt only found one opportunity to see the field, in the All Blacks pool match versus Italy. He scored a try, so good for him. Despite being one of the country's top halfbacks for many years, Duggan struggled to find an opportunity behind Justin Marshall and Byron Callagher. His one test appearance came in the 1999 World Cup, in a 101-3 win over Italy. He was also on the bench for the All Blacks' third place playoff game against South Africa, but never saw the field. Fortunately for him, he managed to carve out a decent career for himself in Super Rugby and for the New Zealand Māori side. Ben Atiga played 6 minutes for the All Blacks in their 2003 World Cup game against Tonga. This is the continuation of one of the most unique families in All Black history. Remember police officer Ned Barry, who played one test in 1934? This is his grandson. Liam Barry had a fairly unique rugby career. He was around for the controversy that cost Laurie Mains his job. This proved to be fortunate for Barry, as Mains didn't believe he was ready for international rugby. This led to his big break, one test against France in 1995. He never played for the All Blacks after this. He left and played most of the remainder of his career in Japan. He did try to get a Super Rugby contract in 2001, but failed. Just 6 years after representing the nation, he couldn't even get a Super Rugby contract, in a season where not a single New Zealand team made the playoffs. He's now an assistant coach for the New Zealand Sevens side. The unique thing about the Barrys is that they're not just a family of All Blacks, they're a family of one test All Blacks. But what happened in between these two? What did Liam's dad and Ned's son do? Found him! This is the only family with 3 consecutive generations of All Blacks, which is all that can be said about this family. They all deserve credit for making the All Blacks, but unless we can find something remarkable about Kevin, we might have just found the most mediocre family in rugby history. Nothing. Not even one single test. Damn it, Kevin. One test is all I wanted. The family almost achieved one of the great feats of mediocrity, but failed because they were too mediocre. Now the faces are starting to get familiar. Three-time Super Rugby champion Norm Berryman played his one test against South Africa in 1998. He was subbed on with the All Blacks up 23-5. They lost 23-24. Here's a video tribute to him, accompanied by the most iconic rugby highlight video song.
Like a blind man reading, I'm feeling it like, oh, yeah, here comes the, oh, here comes the, oh, here comes the, y'all don't really want it like, yeah, here comes the, oh, here comes the, oh, here comes the, y'all don't really want it like, yeah, here comes the, oh, here comes the, oh, here comes the, y'all don't really want it like, yeah, here comes the, oh, here comes the, oh, here comes the, y'all don't really want it like, he think he got her when he know he's off his butter. He ain't never been a fighter. You can go and ask his mother. I'm a lover and a fighter. A fighter, producer and a writer. Give your girl a quick fix and give your man a nice shiner. You know y'all don't really want it, and I can tell just by looking at you that you the type.
In some situations, players who shouldn't have ever had test caps got them because of policy. Stephen Bates is a very familiar face due to his time providing TV analysis of rugby for Sky Sport. What some younger fans might not know is that he was a fan favourite for Waikato and carved out a very successful career. Bates' one All Black test came courtesy of Graham Henry's controversial rotation policy, and if you don't know how that ended, ask someone, but as a note of caution, you'll probably ruin their day. Bates was subbed on for Richie McCaw with 14 minutes to go in the 2004 test against Italy. You know how I started this video by saying Harry Atkinson was arguably the least talented All Black ever? Well, let's just say there are several contenders for that distinction. If there's a definition for the word battler, that definition either has to include the Black Caps of the mid-2000s or the name Jamie McIntosh. McIntosh was often dubbed as a future All Black throughout his youth and played in every national side for which he was available. But once he got to the pros and signed on with Southland, things slowed down a bit. He fell behind the pace a bit and was mostly forgotten about. As a matter of fact, his AllBlack.com player profile hasn't been updated since 2007. Despite all of this, McIntosh toiled away in Southland for 11 long years, highlighted by the incredible 9-3 win over Canterbury in 2009 to claim the Ranfurly Shield. McIntosh will play his only All Black test in 2008 against Scotland. After being pushed around by the Scottish fullback in the first half, he was subbed out early in the second spell by Nemia Teilata, and the scrums turned around big time. He will play once more for All Blacks against Munster. McIntosh should be commended. He battled in the most rubbish part of the country for 11 years. And I'm not afraid to say that because I've bravely decided to not put my name in the credits. And despite probably not being that great of a player, absolutely earned his one chance in black. It will be rude not to show the absolute highlight of his career though.
Team's exhausted. A turnover may determine the final outcome of the match. All Southland need to do is kick it out. They're taking their time over it. No mistakes will be the call. There's a penalty. That will be the Shield changeover. Jimmy Cann is delighted. So too the rest of the Southland team. Stand by for an eruption. Half a century of waiting is over.
Okay, we're waiting for the booty.
The ball will need to be cleared to touch. It'll be one of the finest moments in Southland rugby history. They've won the Ranfurly Shield. And boy, are they delighted. The party begins tonight, and that party goes on all summer.
I've now come to this conclusion that rugby excellence is, at least mostly, genetic. Nelson Dalzell played 5 tests for the All Blacks. His grandsons would go on to play well over 100 collectively. One of them was George Whitelock. With his brothers Luke and Sam, they became the first trio of siblings to put on the black jersey. There was one more Whitelock though, Adam. He never got an All Black call-up, but as consolation for him, he had his chance with the All Black Sevens. But this isn't about Adam, this is about George. And in 2009, he earned his debut against Italy in front of his home crowd and scored a try. The Whitelock family is possibly the best rugby family New Zealand has ever produced. They were the first family to have 4 siblings on the field at the same time in a professional game. And even though George only played 1 test coming from such a successful family, he still contributed to the All Black story. And this one, a story that no one would have ever been bothered to tell. The story won't end. These are just a few of the one test All Blacks. In their history there have been many others just like them, and there will continue to be players with one fleeting moment to live their dream. These players aren't irrelevant. As a matter of fact, couldn't be more relevant. They all have a story to tell. Some memorable, some forgettable, some of luck, or absence of it. They were heroes. They were family. They had all the talent and potential in the world, or barely enough to get them as far as they did. Their one test mattered, like all tests do. They were All Blacks.